If you would believe, as the flying saucer cultists would have us believe, that the majority of the saucer reports are due to visitations, then you have a very strange situation. That means several spaceships are coming to the Earth over interstellar distances every day, as if all the anthropologists in the world were to converge on
many of our audience and listeners as well. Today is December 1st, 2016, a few weeks away from the 20th anniversary of Carl Sagan's death. And I know that's pretty hard to believe that it's been that long, 2 decades since we've heard his sane, rational voice, one that is really needed now more than ever. And if you know anything about Carl Sagan, you know that he dedicated his life and his professional career to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And the quote you did hear pretty much is the premise of our show. But what if I told you that Carl Sagan once wrote a paper while working for Stanford that actually supplied evidence for ancient aliens and their visitation to Earth? And then what if I told you in this Stanford paper that Carl Sagan wrote, that he wrote his own mathematical equation to prove that ancient aliens once visited Earth, and how long ago, and when was the possibility of their last visit? Imagine how controversial this paper is, especially when it was funded by a NASA research grant. Author Donald Zygutis joins us in a few moments as we explore this paper and idea featured in his book, The Sagan Conspiracy, NASA's Untold Plot to Suppress the People's Scientists' Theory of Ancient Aliens. Tonight, Donald and I are going to challenge the conventional thinking about the people's scientist and maybe even the origins of human society. Join us in just a few moments. This is The Mind's Eye. We're back on The Mind's Eye, and I don't know if you heard, but the U.S. military is preparing for the next frontier, and that is space wars. A few U.S. adversaries have been deploying weapons beyond Earth's atmosphere, aka space, and in return, the U.S. military is now preparing for the frightening prospect of war in space. You can get great articles like this and even take a little tour of the ISS, the International Space Station. You should either follow us or like us on Facebook and Twitter. Go to our social media websites. Our Twitter handle is @MindsEyeShow. And then like us on Facebook, facebook.com/MindsEyeShow. We'll be back in a matter of moments with author Donald Zygutis talking about ancient aliens and Carl Sagan. See you on the other side of the break. This is The Mind's Eye. Now joining us is author Donald Zygutis. Thanks so much for giving us a Mind's Eye moment, Donald.
No problem. Glad to do it, Brian.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what led to a lifelong affinity of the life and work of Carl Sagan is obviously what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, I'm 72 years old, so I've been around a while, and actually my degree is in theology and education from Corbin University over in Salem, Oregon. So I started out as an evangelical Christian, and at that time, Carl Sagan was enemy numero uno to the Christian faith, because he was hammering Christians' belief in miracles of the Bible and a lot of other stuff that couldn't be scientifically proven. So I kind of made it a point to check up on this guy and study who he was and what he was about. And when the articles in Parade magazine or when he appeared on the Johnny Carson show, I tried to make it a point to read them and to watch them. And instead of me converting him, he ended up converting me. And I left the Christian faith. I became a secular humanist, and I never have lost my admiration for Carl Sagan. And I just have tried to read everything he wrote and just follow his career as best I could.
Has your beliefs changed at all? You said that he converted you to secularism, or they're still, firmly planted there?
It's more planted than ever. His ability to articulate the scientific method, his ability to communicate with people of all ages what science was all about, and how the scientific method was really the best way to determine the truth. It just left a deep impression on me, and it's stronger today than it's ever been.
We're here to talk about your latest, the Sagan conspiracy, NASA's untold plot to suppress the people's scientists' theory of ancient aliens. Just tell us a little bit more.
Sure. If you go back to the beginning of SETI, the radio telescope, and this goes back to 1960, and right around that time, that's also kind of the beginning of the ancient alien movement, which most people date back to 1968 when Eric von Daniken wrote Chariot of the Gods, although there's stuff before that. And at that time, in 1960, Carl Sagan was a part of the team of scientists that created NASA, and he was also invited to the Green Banks Conference in Green Banks, West Virginia, where 10 or 11 scientists got together and they thought about the possibility of using radio telescopes to detect an alien signal sent to us from outer space. At that time, Carl Sagan was already convinced that the radio telescope search would never be a success. In his research, he was convinced that if there are any extraterrestrials in our galaxy, they'd be so far advanced than we are, that they'd be godlike, and they would have already reached Earth long time ago, and he was convinced that they had. But at that time, it was so controversial that he didn't dare bring it up at the Green Banks Conference, because that conference was about radio telescopes. So he went there, and he walked away with the Drake equation. And then shortly afterwards, in 1962, NASA issued a grant to Carl Sagan to study the plausibility that extraterrestrials have reached Earth. And he was at Berkeley, California at the time, and he went over to Stanford University with the grant, and he worked under the oversight of Dr. Joshua Lederberg, who was a Nobel Prize-winning geneticist. And after the year was out, he had produced a paper that was called, I got it right here in front of me, Direct Contact Among Galactic Civilizations by Relativistic Interstellar Spaceflight. And that paper was then peer-reviewed and published in a scientific publication, Planetary and Space Science. So he did everything right. He followed all the rules, and then that paper disappeared. Now, the radio telescope search was founded on a document written by Cacconi and Morrison in 1959. It's a 2-page document, and it was the justification for launching radio telescope search. And the Sagan paper was 14 pages long, over 40 footnotes, and it should, at that time, have been given due process, launched a NASA-funded search for evidence that extraterrestrials have visited Earth in historical times. And instead of launching it, NASA decided to bury it. And so consequently, it was buried, and then 6 years later, Eric von Daniken wrote Chariot of the Gods, and that's when the popular ancient alien movement began. But if things would have been done properly, ancient alienism would have started as a mainstream scientific endeavor in 1963, and instead it was buried, and that's the conspiracy.
Now, you say it was buried and suppressed, but to me it seems like they would be doing a poor job of it. For example, at the time you mentioned that it was presented, it was published in a peer-reviewed paper, journal. It was presented to the American Rocket Society in the same year. A handwritten copy can be found in the Library of Congress today. So to me, it doesn't, from those angles, it doesn't sound like it was even being suppressed then or even now.
Well, the word suppression is different than the word annihilation or destruction. Think of a fire like a campfire. If you suppress a fire, you tamp it down to keep it from spreading. If you destroy it, then you destroy it so it doesn't even exist. Now, going back to the Morrison-Cacconi paper, that became a famous paper, and it made Morrison and Cacconi famous worldwide. And you can find that paper everywhere in a lot of books, but you won't find Carl Sagan's paper in any popular books or libraries or easily accessed anywhere. And so that's what I mean by suppression.
How did you rediscover it?
I was reading a book called Civilized Life in the Universe by George Vasala, and excellent book. And in the book, I came across a passage in there about a paragraph where he talks about the paper, and he said, this is not just, conjecture or speculation that Sagan sometimes got involved in. He said this was a scientific paper that was funded with a grant from by NASA, and it went through all the proper protocols. And I had not heard of it. I thought, where do I find this paper? So I went to my local library, and they said, sorry, we can't find it. Go up to a college library. And so I went up to the college library, to the research library, and they said, well, we'll look for it and try to, get back to you. So a month later, they said, we can't find it either. And so I waited. I thought, well, this thing's going to be really hard to find. And a couple weeks later, I got a call from a librarian at the local library, said, we found it. And she emailed it to me. And I was absolutely floored by it, about the technical detail, about the scope of it. And it was just it is an amazing document.
I finished it last night. It is fascinating. There are definitely some controversial aspects about it, no doubt about that, and which we're going to go into momentarily. But at the same time, I couldn't help but walk away from the paper that pretty much, to me, it reads as if it's a career mission statement. Carl Sagan believed in the great possibility that there was life in outer space. Isn't something particularly revelatory about Sagan. Some parts were. And then he also says that the best way for contact would be interstellar travel, with something a little bit different. But he says that's centuries away. So the best thing for us to do at the moment is to focus on radio broadcasts, because it's the best, most successful what we have right now. To me, it just sounded like a summation of what he was trying to do with his career.
Well, he was not against using radio telescopes. In fact, he supported it. He thought that any legitimate way to prove the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence should be pursued. But if you go toward the end of the article, he spends quite a bit of time with the thesis that extraterrestrials have visited Earth. And really, that's what the whole article leads up to. That's kind of his grand finale, that he is convinced that extraterrestrials have been to Earth, even in historical times. And also in the article, he kind of basically comes out and he says he doesn't think the radio telescope, strategy has a very good chance of being successful.
Right.
And he always believed that. So it's obvious that he believes that extraterrestrials, if they exist, it's kind of like an extension of Fermi's paradox, that if there are extraterrestrials out there, then they should have been to Earth. So where are they? And so that's kind of his hypothesis.
Exactly, and there definitely were some controversial aspects. Let's get into some of those. You said that his belief that that aliens did visit us, at least in historic time, and that is obviously fairly controversial in itself. But he actually, what I thought was great about this is that he was not necessarily really trying to prove that, but more like he was trying to give more of a mathematical, tangible evidence for it instead of ancient alien theory as proof of such things.
he had to be very, very cautious. I think he was a brilliant, absolutely brilliant scientist. And he knew, and at that time he was a young scientist. And there were a lot of things happening with NASA, getting ready to start building toward the moonshot, and there was a lot of stuff going on. And so he knew that advocating aliens visiting Earth would be highly controversial and could even jeopardize his career. And at that time, most of the scientists did not believe that interstellar spaceflight was a physical possibility. They were convinced that it would take too much energy to speed up close to the speed of light. And of course, you got Einstein's cosmic speed limit. Too much energy to slow down. Therefore, don't even talk about it. Don't even discuss it. Take it off the table. Frank Drake, in his book, he says at the Green Bay conference, we didn't even discuss the possibility of aliens visiting Earth because we thought it was too far, too kooky, too far off the chart. Well, Carl Sagan, realizing this, had to tread very, very carefully, and he did. And so I don't believe that he ever came out and said fully what he really believed.
You talked about the actual calculations. I mean, I thought this was pretty interesting. I mean, according to his calculations, if contact was made, if we start interstellar travel, and that means obviously aliens would have done it as well, intelligence. If contact is made on a purely random basis, he calculated that each star would be visited about once every 100,000 years, and then once some type of communication established, contact recently would then come to once every 1,000 years. I mean that's a pretty interesting mathematical formula and calculations that he came up with.
That is very perceptive of you to notice that, Brian, and it's kind of an example of how Carl Sagan wrote. He would write scientific jargon, and then every once in a while he'd drop in something very, very special, and that's one of those special things, because if he thought that extraterrestrials introduced civilization to the Sumerians, which he believed, that was several thousands of years before Christ. And so using that statement, you can calculate that even between Jesus Christ and the present, that we may have been visited by extraterrestrials.
I mean, to me, after reading the paper, I mean, it seems fairly obvious that he, although believed, he didn't use the ancient alien theory, what we at least define it now as evidence. He merely thought it was actually flimsy at best, anecdotal evidence, but he seemed hell-bent on mathematically proving it. And clearly, I mean, he was obviously fascinated by the ancient alien theory, regardless if he was 100%, regardless of what he said or didn't say. Clear fascination with it.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm saying that this paper that he wrote, this 14-page paper, is really a foundational document that the ancient alien community should embrace, because if we ever want to be thought of as mainstream science, if we ever want to have our movement brought under the scientific umbrella, then we need a foundational document written by a scientist who for 30 years was regarded as the world's foremost expert on extraterrestrial intelligence. And he did his research at a leading university, and he went, and it was peer-reviewed, and it was published. So he did everything right, and there's no reason why the ancient alien movement can't be accepted by NASA even today as a credible option, particularly since after 50 years the radio telescope experiment has failed to detect anything, not even one legitimate alien signal, and Carl Sagan pretty much predicted that would be the case.
It really is fascinating in the paper, because if you were to close your eyes and read, and I was to read some of the statements out loud, you would easily could mix that up for someone, Eric von Däniken or Zecharia Sitchin writing this, not Carl Sagan. And just for one example, we could say that at the end, I mean, he drops something that's he doesn't talk about it at all, really doesn't talk about it afterward, but I mean, drops something that's very interesting. He talks about how if alien contact and intelligent alien life had the ability to for interstellar travel, there would probably be some type of artifacts left on the planet, but not even that they would probably leave some type of base somewhere, not on Earth, but maybe somewhere else. And he then uses the moon, the dark side of the moon, as a perfect example for where an alien base would be. I mean, that's fascinating stuff. I mean, of course, then 7 years later, boom, we're on the moon. So I mean, that in itself is to me was probably the most one of the most controversial aspects of it.
Yeah, he had three angles. He had three premises that he thought might be viable. One was artifacts that could be left on Mars or the moon or on Earth or in one of the other planets or moons in our solar system. The other one was that possibly ancient aliens impacted our DNA, that we may actually carry alien influence in our DNA as aliens interacted with humans. And the third one is that he thought there might be ancient manuscripts related to the Sumerians that could contain perhaps a code or some type of evidence that would prove that they were here, because he believed that it was ancient aliens that introduced writing to humanity.
Now, where did you get that part of it? Because he never really the ancient writing part, because he never really said that in the paper itself. So I mean, it seems to me that you might be extrapolating a little bit there.
Well, there's another primary document that he wrote in conjunction with a Russian scientist, I.S. Shlikovsky. I probably didn't say that right, but it's called Intelligent Life in the Universe.
Right. It was his first book, technically.
Yeah, technically it was. And in he devotes 2 entire chapters to the subject of ancient aliens. And in there, he expands on the Sumerian legends, the Sumerian king list, and some of the other legends, and about their language. Their language has no known connection to any other human language, and so on. So that's also a key document that I used in my research.
Now, he also says that something that was definitely controversial at the time, something that was going against what pretty much all major scientists were saying at the time, that not only the possibility or even the probability that they exist, that they're actually fairly close to us. He believed that they were only intelligent alien life communities would be only several hundred light years away, while others at the time were thinking that hundreds of thousands of light years away.
That's true, but the latest research on that, and this is another amazing fact, if you go to the SETI Institute website and check out what they have to say about Fermi's paradox, and they have completely changed their position on interstellar space flight. And they said, given the age of the universe, given the age of our galaxy, and given the age of the Earth, they said that extraterrestrials anywhere in our galaxy, even moving at 10 or 20% of the speed of light, have had more than enough time to explore the entire galaxy and could have reached Earth. And this is on SETI's website, and it's an amazing admission. And another incredible development that's happened in the last 10, 15 years is that NASA right now has 2 projects that are intended to develop interstellar spaceflight by the end of this century. And one of them is called Icarus Interstellar, and the other one is called the 100-Year Starship Project. And they are on the internet, and they feature very, very scientific papers and concepts, and it's an amazing admission that if we are this close to developing interstellar space flight, then aliens, possibly hundreds of thousands or even millions of years beyond us, they should have been traversing the stars for a very, very long time, as Carl Sagan believed.
Yeah, this is about 54, 55 years later. Carl Sagan in the paper said that the best way forward to do so is the interstellar travel. But he also noted that it was centuries away. You just said that we're nearing fairly close to it. I mean, in your research, how close are we actually to interstellar travel?
The 100-Year Starship Project, and it's well worth checking out. Their goal is to have a prototype working by the end of this century. So actually, it's a shorter time than what Carl Sagan, contemplated. And the other one, Icarus Interstellar, which is kind of a competitive project is working toward the same goal. And so they're not hesitating at all. Right after Carl Sagan died, work on interstellar space flight for humans began right away. And you don't hear about it, you don't read about it, but it's active and it's going on right now. And actually, in magazines and newspapers, there's been more and more talk about human interstellar space flight. So actually, the reality is actually gone ahead of what Carl Sagan speculated.
You would seem that this is something that they would want a little bit more out in the open, or at least more with public relations with it. I mean, from how it seems, you would never think that we're even close to this. I mean, I spoke to a nuclear physicist who's saying the same exact thing as Carl Sagan. He said that interstellar travel is possible right now. It's just about allocating the time and resources to it. So clearly we're doing it right now. I feel like that should be probably a little bit more out in the open. It doesn't seem to be common knowledge.
I don't know what's going on with NASA. I do some speculating in my book about that. I know behind NASA there's the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is involved in the 100-year Starship project. And of course, the Pentagon is about weapon system and about Star Wars type stuff that can be used to basically kill and destroy. And that's what NASA is not about, supposedly. So I bring this up in my book, and it's kind of a extension of my conspiracy theory that the Pentagon's not interested in letting the public, know really what's going on with developing interstellar spaceflight. That it's not necessarily for peaceful purposes.
What would it be used for?
Well, I think right now there's a race toward Mars, and between the Chinese and the Americans.
Right. And
I think that the Chinese, more so than Russia, I think the Chinese see what the United States is doing. They see what the Pentagon's about, and I think that they see this as how to win the high ground. And in this case, the high ground is outer space, and the one that can control the high ground, it will be the ultimate victor. And so, developing interstellar spaceflight, I think, is a part of that agenda.
Aren't there international space laws in place that go against that exact idea?
There's international laws in place that against using nuclear power or using nuclear bombs in space, and there's some other things that have to do with satellites. But as far as going out clear into interstellar space, there, to my knowledge, there are no laws at all. It's open. It's an open field. It's
going to be like the wild, wild west, if and when it happens.
Right.
That's terrible. All right, well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to focus a little bit more on the ancient alien astronaut theory and Carl Sagan's ideas of it as he went throughout his life. We'll be right back with author Donald Zygutis. This is The Mind's Eye. To me, it's interesting because when I came away from the paper, it just seemed like it also seemed fairly contradictory. Like at one moment he would say something, then next paragraph he would say the opposite of it.
He was doing a dance. He, like I said, his career was at stake, and his career was at stake throughout his life. He had to be extremely careful about anything that he wrote about extraterrestrials on Earth. So in all of his books, he kind of mentions it in different ways, in a very slight way, but he was never allowed to come out and really talk freely about what he believed because it was anathema. He could have lost his privileges as a scientist working with NASA. And I think that really had an amazing impact on his life, and it was a terrible thing. It was manipulation on the part of NASA and a part of a inner group of scientists who wanted nothing to do with ancient aliens. I believe that it was the reason why twice he was nominated for the National Academy of Sciences and twice he was voted down. I believe it was because they knew that he believed in ancient aliens. I believe that he was not granted tenure at Harvard University because he believed in ancient alienism. And so this was something that impacted his life in real fundamental ways.
So you think that this might have been writing this paper and then the pushback that he received from it, at least academically, for his career, might have formulated his hesitation throughout the rest of his career to make such at least a close to a commitment like he did in this paper.
Exactly right. Yeah, this paper here, he knew it was right away, it was buried, and he thought it was not given due process. It was not afforded the courtesies that a scientific paper of its nature would normally be afforded. There is no record that I could find of any other papers that were written that, to negate it or to deconstruct it. That would be a normal part of the scientific process. It was simply put away, suppressed, and not disseminated, not talked about, not written about. Frank Drake and a few others referred to it as bad science or something that came out of Looney Tunes or something like that without actually mentioning the paper, by its title. And so, Carl Sagan was not dumb. He wanted to preserve his career as a astronomer, and so he realized that he had to keep quiet. He may have even been approached by some people at NASA saying that if you value your career, you won't talk about this at all. And he brought it up in kind of quiet ways throughout his life and his writings, but that's the most that he could do.
You can go out on a limb, but don't go out completely at the end of the branch, or else you're probably going to fall off. It seems to me might have been
exactly right.
A little bit of lesson there. So let's talk a little bit more of his belief in the ancient alien theory, or supposed belief in the ancient alien theory, because as you read throughout it, he says that pretty much. I mean, later on, Carl Sagan was the most open anti-Eric von Däniken person, that there was. I mean, he said everything about Eric von Däniken, all of his conclusions were just premised on sloppy logic, not necessarily actually against the idea itself, but the way that he came up to those conclusions was the major issue.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And I'm on the scientific side of the ledger. I'm on Carl's side of the ledger, not on the ancient alien side. And so I don't give a lot of love to ancient alien theorists in my book. And I have thought about it, and I might have been too hard. I believe that the methodology is not the premise that Carl disagreed with. He never disagreed with the idea that ancient aliens could have come to Earth, or extraterrestrials could have come to Earth. It was simply a matter of the chosen methodology. And it's kind of like fishing. You can have a fishing boat using a trawler, or you can have a fishing boat using a single hook. Carl Sagan believed in the single hook method, where you pick the best lead and you dig down deep, and so deep until you either hit a brick wall or you find a smoking gun. And whereas Eric von Däniken and Sitchin and others, they use the trawling method. They go across and pick up every curiosity, every archaeological, historical, geological curiosity, and they weave a narrative around that involves extraterrestrials. And so that was the issue that Carl Sagan had with a contemporary ancient alien theorist.
He was 28 years old when he came out with his paper, so it's not exactly necessarily like he was 16, where a lot of your opinions are still changing. But at the same time, it seemed like he did move away from that belief later on, because he did later reject the idea that, what we're talking about, of course, that ancient aliens came to Earth and then maybe somehow even helped human civilization. In his book, in 1973 book, Cosmic Connection, I mean, he pretty much rejects the whole idea of that.
Well, he never. I disagree. He was relating to, again, the conventional ancient alien movement. But it's worth noting that before he died, the last paper that he was working on, the last scientific paper that he was working on, that he wasn't able to complete, the title was on the rarity of long-lived non-spacefaring galactic civilizations. It's kind of a double negative. So what he's saying in his last paper, which I talked quite a bit about in my book, was that if there are galactic civilizations out there that are long-lived, the chances that they are non-spacefaring is extremely rare. meaning that they are out there and about traversing the galaxy. So it was something that he, and going to the other end, you said at 28, but actually back in 1956, when he was at the University of Chicago, he was working on this concept. And so, it's something that he believed in throughout his life. And again, he had to be extremely careful about how he talked about it. His relationship with conventional ancient alienism was caustic, and he was the number one opponent of it. And so it's really easy to conclude that he didn't believe in it. In fact, that he was the number one antagonizer, when really he believed in it passionately. And he believed that there was a smoking gun out there. And Brian, I have to say this, I'm not totally convinced that he didn't find that smoking gun, and that may have had something to do with his death.
Let's stay right there for a second. Actually, what did you find there to support that idea? Because that's a very weighty thing to say. that possibly led to.
I realize that. So let me clarify that.
Please.
I don't have any proof that Carl Sagan was murdered, but I do know that as far as NASA's concerned and the Pentagon's concerned, Carl Sagan was kind of standing in the way of the development of interstellar spaceflight. Because if NASA would have come out and started these two programs, Icarus Interstellar and the 100-Year Starship Project, while Carl Sagan was still alive, he would have basically been free to reintroduce his original paper, which was based on interstellar spaceflight. So it's like he had to, if there had to be motive, and there had to be, the method. And the motive possibly for his death was that he was standing in the way of NASA developing interstellar spaceflight. And the cause of his death was myelodysplasia. I probably didn't pronounce that right, but a very, very rare form of cancer. And one of the causes of myelodysplasia is exposure to radioactive, minute traces of radioactivity, and the Pentagon, of course, would have had access to that material. So there's a couple of circumstances there, and maybe I'm a little paranoid about this because I really cared about the man. He should be alive today. He died at 62. He was in wonderful health. He kept up an incredible work pace. Very few people could keep up with him, and all of a sudden he gets this very rare form of cancer. And so I just bring it up, and I'm not saying that that's why he died, but I bring it up because of the circumstantial evidence.
Why wouldn't they want someone who's considered, or one of the foremost scientists in the world, particularly who's talked about interstellar travel? Why wouldn't they want to use his brain and what he brings to it, as opposed to not the exact opposite of waiting till after his death, or maybe even having a hand in it, so to speak?
Because interstellar travel is the foundational claim that makes ancient alienism possible. Think about it. If NASA would have said, we're going to start developing interstellar spaceflight, us humans who are barely 300 or 400 years into the age of science, it wouldn't take long for Carl Sagan to start speaking and writing and appearing on television saying, if humans are already doing this, what must extraterrestrials, thousands or hundreds of thousands more years of advanced than us, what would they be capable of? So Carl Sagan was really ready to roll out his view on ancient alienism as soon as NASA declared that they changed their position on interstellar spaceflight. For 30 years, from 1962 till 1992, the cornerstone doctrine of NASA was that interstellar spaceflight was impossible. Right after Carl Sagan died, they started working on it.
I mean, obviously the timeline there is interesting. Me, I'm a bit of a conspiracist, but I'm not going to lie, that one might be a little bit out there for me.
And I don't make a big deal of my book. I just wanted to get it on record.
I appreciate it.
That if there are other people out there that have any knowledge or any more information that they want to add to that would be something. But I wanted to get it out there on the record.
And since you just bring that up, why don't you give out your contact information just in case somebody has something to bring to the table to you, or to you?
Sure. I have a website. It's thesaganconspiracy.com. I have a Facebook, and I have a Twitter. So this stuff will be coming. I'm kind of getting my whole act together. The book will, and so I'm kind of getting everything together here and making it making myself more accessible.
You talk about how this paper, he might have learned his lesson, like we were saying, go out on a limb, but don't go too far out. But at the same time, I'm not sure how accurate that could be, because not only that, his first book, as we were talking about, Intelligent Life in the Universe, which came out a few years later, collaborative effort with Shavatsky. I'm probably butchering that name just as well. But not only did he talk about everything in this paper, he expanded upon it. So in some sense, that is right, but in other ways, it's not.
It's what?
I said, in some ways, yes, you can see in the way that he talks about ancient aliens and the possibility of life later on in his life that it's more of a possibility as opposed to a probability, which he states here. But in the first book, I'm not sure he necessarily did learn a lesson. I mean, because in his first book, just a few years later, even after pushback, he still talked about everything in here and even expanded upon it.
No, you're exactly right, and I think when you're driven with a passion, and his goal was to be the man who made the greatest scientific discovery in the history of science, which would be to prove the existence of extraterrestrials, to prove that humans are not alone in the universe, that we have cosmic company. He firmly believed in that, and in his education, he got degrees in both astronomy and in biology, making him the world's first astrobiologist. He was the world's first ancient alien theorist, and he had a very keen sense of what he wanted to do with his life and his career as a trained scientist. At the same time, he had to walk this narrow line to keep from being basically losing his career as a working astronomer. And so it was like, how do you do that balancing act? And it was something that he had to do throughout his life. And so he kept, kind of like a teenager, you keep pushing the button, but you don't go too far. And so, he kept on pushing it throughout his life in his different writings, even in his novel Contact. He has aliens sending a signal on how to build a time machine that would enable humans to go to where aliens are. Well, if you think about it, if humans can build a time machine to go where aliens are, then aliens would have had that same time machine to come where we are. It can go both ways. And so, I think he kept on working the edge, and maybe at times he got reprimanded, I don't know, but that's the game he played, and it was a very serious game.
Contact is one of my favorite movies. I mean, to me, even before I knew who Carl Sagan was, and I'm kind of giving away my age here, I'm in my mid-30s here, that was, to me, I always believed that is the most realistic way first contact would happen.
Yeah, and I think that he was a great writer. He wrote almost all of his books were international bestsellers. He was the most famous, well-known scientist on the planet. We think of scientists as being kind of American or Western. He was famous in Japan and Russia and China, everywhere. I mean, he was a world figure, and he had a really unique talking style and a unique writing style. And so, he just knew how to communicate. And at the same time, he wasn't able to communicate his deepest passion, his deepest beliefs, and that was an ancient alienism, that extraterrestrials have been here to Earth, that they introduced civilization to the Sumerians, and that if you dig down deeply and stay with it and persistent and doggedly stay with that somewhere in there, in that line of inquiry, there's a smoking gun. And I believe that in the next few years, that smoking gun is going to appear.
We were talking before how he's full of, it seems full of contradictions. Even in this paper, one paragraph he writes that he kind of dismisses the ancient alien theory, at least as good evidence or any evidence at all. But then the next one he says, well, maybe the Sumerian one possibly could fit it. But then he later on compares the ancient alien theory to a religious idea of today, and that the terminology, although is slightly different, instead of talking, we talk about angels, maybe we're talking about extraterrestrials, but and the reason for it is, because we're in a dire situation right now. I mean, we don't talk about angels, we talk about extraterrestrials because of the emotional significance is identical, as he says. He says it would be very nice to believe that there are powerful beings to look after us up in their sky, and they dip in and make things good and right. He would be delighted if that happened, but he believes that's a dangerous doctrine to believe and that it's a false in itself. I mean, how do you respond to that?
That's a fascinating subject, and I have a background in theology, and I'm one paper short of getting my master's in theology. And I'll tell you a little secret. There are thousands of theologians and church leaders and religious leaders around the world that are keenly aware that they're of what I call the God-alien equivalency principle. And different people like Michael Shermer and others have talked about it. Even Richard Dawkins has talked about it. What's the difference between a deity and a godlike extraterrestrial? If we were to meet an extraterrestrial that was 1 million years more advanced than us, would we be able to distinguish whether it was an extraterrestrial or a deity? They would have that kind of power. And many analogies have been made to us today if we were in a time machine and went back 5,000 years or even 5 centuries with some of our modern, things that we have today, our technologies. We would be worshipped by those people as gods. There's no question about it. So, that is something that Carl Sagan was keenly aware of, and it raises the question, could some of the gods of antiquity have been extraterrestrials? And of course, ancient alien theorists really make a big deal out of this, and they're exactly right. Could they have been? And perhaps they were, and I believe that at least some of them were.
It seems on one side he wants to believe, on the other side he can't believe.
Well, I think the danger they talked about was that rejecting the scientific method and embracing religion. And once you embrace religion, it kind of turns your brain, it puts your brain in kind of rigor mortis, because you don't think about new possibilities because you have all the answers. And so I think that was the danger to him, that the religious mindset is kind of counter to the scientific mindset. The scientific mindset wants to keep on generating new questions and new answers and new possibilities, new hypotheses. The religious mindset is kind of, wants to pass on doctrines and creeds that had been formulated centuries ago, and so you have diametrically opposite mindsets. And so I think that's what he saw as the danger.
In your opinion, how should your book, and at least this paper, change the public perception of Carl Sagan?
Well, I think it's a bombshell, and I expect to get a lot of blowback. And really, the book is meant to generate discussion, and I'm hoping for a lot of it, both from the ancient alien side and from the mainstream science side. And it's a very, very honest book, and I consider myself a very honest person. I don't claim to have all the answers, and if I've made mistakes and somebody points them out, I'll own those mistakes. And I'll let people know on my website that, hey, I screwed up, I made a mistake. But right now I stand by what I say in the book. And so I think it's going to be highly controversial. I don't believe there's any other book like it. It could be a pivotal book as far as the whole subject of extraterrestrials and ancient aliens is concerned. It opens up the possibility that ancient alienism, using the Sagan model, could be considered or by mainstream science to be acceptable. And if there's any empirical evidence that shows up, that is generated, that is testable, that NASA or others would be willing to test it. And so I think that the next year after the book is out there and it's going to be published in a lot of different languages, I think it could generate a lot of very interesting discussions.
Yeah, I'm hoping it leads to some interesting discourse about Carl Sagan and expanding at least what we think of Carl Sagan, or at least his beliefs. Something new to the table. I mean, what has been said about Carl Sagan has been said before, but this is definitely something that's going to at least forward the conversation a little bit more. And Contra, I'm glad you're ready for some blowback, because quite frankly, I think there's going to be a lot of it, because I mean we've entered in our own discourse here, and you can see that I'm trying to play devil's advocate regardless of my personal beliefs, right. But I'm at least trying to do that in a in a very respectful way. So I hope you're probably ready for at least some trolling at the least.
You're right, and also Brian, part of this is Carl Sagan died in 1996, and he died shortly after. He died on December the 20th. So we're approaching the 20th anniversary of his death, and so part of the reason why I wrote this book was to honor a man who I consider was one of the great human beings, one of the great scientists of the 20th century, and also one of the most misunderstood men. And I believe that his legacy, as it has been presented, is not accurate. People that have written his obituary has left out his belief in ancient alienism, and I think that needs to be corrected. A lot of young people today don't know who Carl Sagan was because he's associated with a radio telescope experiment that has been a failure, and NASA has moved on to looking for microbial life in outer space, and they've kind of left SETI behind. And I think that's Carl Sagan never believed it would work, and he's proven right on that. So I'm standing up for the man that I believe in, and I believe that I have his life and his beliefs right. And if others want to try to prove me wrong, then more power to them.
Let's bring it to today. A lot of things have come out in the last 5 years. And to me, it seems almost every couple of days, it seems like we're discovering another possible habitable planet. In this paper itself, I thought one of those particularly was that he thought that we should expand the idea of the Goldilocks principle.
That the original Drake equation, where they calculated that there were thousands or millions or even more than that number of habitable civilizations in our galaxy, that's been downscaled. I've seen the figure that scientists they think there might be 250 civilizations in our galaxy rather than thousands or millions. But even 250, it only if they're advanced and godlike and able to traverse galactic distances in short periods of time or whatever, then they would have been to Earth as well. But you're right, as far as Goldilocks planets, the more we look, the more we find. And I know that the James Webb telescope is going to be coming online in a couple of years, and when that comes online, I expect it to find probably millions or even billions of Goldilocks planets out there. So, the hard science behind ancient alienism is solid, because once you start going down that line of logic, that there are Goldilocks planets, that we are not so privileged to be the only sentient life in the universe, that there are, almost has to be other life forms out there that have evolved and reached, a point of intelligence and sentience, that the galaxy should be populated with other, intelligent beings.
It reminds me of a quote that I was reading. I mean, he says that in regard to intelligence, I mean, it's particularly human intelligence. It's clear that evolution of intelligence is a result of, for us at least, many unlikely events, and that it is almost nearly impossible to replicate. But he then says, but intelligence is so adaptive that it's going to come forth regardless of where.
Right, and I agree with that, and it's called the mediocrity principle. And of course, for thousands of years, religion, they said that we're the only intelligent species, that God created us and nobody else. But there's a lot of religions right now that are very open to the possibility of there being aliens out there, but they want to keep them out there. They don't want to have them down here, and so that's kind of the rub. But
I mean, the Vatican has one of the best. I was going to say the Vatican has one of the best observatories in the world.
Exactly right, but if you read the literature, the religious literature, it's always like the aliens are out there, okay, and if they ever come here, we'll convert them or whatever. And they don't like to talk about. In fact, they don't talk about the possibility of aliens being down here on Earth because it comes too close to Jesus Christ. Could Jesus Christ have been an extraterrestrial? He said, "I am not of this world." He talks about the world that he came from and the world he's going back to. That could be interpreted to be the language of an extraterrestrial very easily.
Some would argue that might be a bit of a slippery slope logic, but it's obviously that's an idea that's been put forth before. I don't necessarily think that. I think it's easy to take things out of context and then manipulate it to form it into an opinion that or a bias that you already have. Personally, I think that's where that part, the Jesus Christ one, falls as an alien. But we were talking before how Carl Sagan in this paper clearly states that he thinks interstellar travel is the best form of communication, but and that's centuries away, but radio signal is really the best we got, so that's obviously what he focused on. And you were saying how it's a failure.
Well, the radio signals traveling at the speed of light, they would take hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of years to get from where the aliens live to Earth, okay? And so when we got the message, if we got the signal, if we were able to decode it, we'd have to realize that this was a message that was sent to us thousands of years ago, not where aliens are at this very moment. And so if we got the message and decoded it and we wanted to respond, then it would take thousands or tens of thousands of years for our signal to get to them. And Carl Sagan, and sometimes he does it in kind of a humorous way. He said that's really not a very good way to carry on a conversation, and and there's much better ways to go about doing it. And the best way, of course, is direct contact, which he believed that extraterrestrials would do. And then you get the whole issue of extraterrestrial advancement. We are, especially back in the 1960s, shortly after radio telescopes were invented, we were enamored with that technology. And you know how technology works. Moore's law, technology advances at exponential rates. So the technology that we think is really cool, we're actually comparing it to where we were a couple hundred years ago. But for extraterrestrials who may be thousands of years more advanced than we are, they may look at radio telegraphy as something like smoke signals or something like that. We might be ridiculously naive in thinking that they would be using a technology that we just found out that many years ago. They might have they may be communicating through dark energy and dark matter, and who knows what. I don't even think our best science fiction writers have the imagination to really get a grip on what advanced aliens might be able to do.
What did Carl Sagan ever say about the wow signal?
Oh, the wow signal.
If he even commented at all on it.
It didn't amount to much. It was kind of like a tempest in a teapot. They got all excited about it, but it wasn't replicated, and it only came through one time, and they couldn't make any sense out of it. It was tested over 100 times, and it still is an object of some curiosity. But it was a blip that appeared at the Big Ear Telescope in Ohio, and it came one time, and they looked it over in different ways, and I think Carl Sagan just passed it off as an anomaly. And he only actually actively got involved in searching for radio signals one time. And Frank Drake, in his book, Is Anyone Out There? He was with Carl Sagan when they did it, and after about 20 minutes, Carl Sagan started staring out the window looking bored. And And Frank Drake said, well, this is not going to be an easy thing, staring at a screen looking for an alien signal. And Carl Sagan, in my estimation, he wasn't bored. He said, hey, if we've looked at all these, millions, I think even billions of stars, and if we haven't seen a signal now, we could do this for another 100 or 1,000 years. We're not going to find a signal. It's just not going to happen. Because if aliens are sending out radio signals, they ought to be everywhere throughout the galaxy, and other scientists have weighed in on this, and this is another thing that NASA has said you don't like to talk about, that if there are extraterrestrials out there sending out radio signals, then we should, as soon as we turn our screens on, they should be there, and after 55 years, there's been nothing.
What do you see in the future of space? In the next 100 years or so, if let's say me and you are talking 100 years from now, our grandkids are talking to each other. My grandkids interview your grandkid. What do you think they're going to say is going on in space?
Well, I'm not a scientist. I'm not qualified, but that doesn't keep me from giving an opinion. I think that based upon what Carl Sagan has written on the subject, he said that if his thesis is right, that if extraterrestrials have visited Earth approximately once every 1,000 years, and as time goes on, they visit Earth more frequently. I think that, and he even talked about it. He said that we can expect a visit from extraterrestrials at some time in the next few centuries. He talks about it in Intelligent Life in the Universe. And so, that is probably the most one of the most sensational things that he said, but it's consistent with his overall belief that extraterrestrials were here in geological time, but over, not that often. But then as humans came along and we developed intelligence, that they started appearing more often. And as we go through in the future, that they will appear even more often with more frequency. So I think there's two different forces here. One is the human need to explore space, to go out and interstellar space eventually. And the other one is, if we're thinking about doing that, if we have that kind of curiosity, then extraterrestrials, far more advanced than us, would have had the same curiosity. They would have wanted to know what's on the other side of the mountain, and they would have been exploring the galaxy, and they would have come to Earth. So I think that it's something that we're enamored with space. We're going to keep on searching space, developing new technologies. At the same time, I think hopefully ancient alienism will become a mainstream science.
Do you think this paper mathematically proves that there is intelligent alien life out there? And, of course, the ancient alien theory as well?
No, when you say prove, if you're using the word prove in a scientific sense, then no, it doesn't. It's a hypothesis. It's a scientific hypothesis, and he uses, scientific methods to convey that. And I think it's a strong paper, and I think it deserves to be disseminated. And by the way, I have the entire paper in the back of the book. It costs over $1,000 to get the rights to reprint it, and so anybody who buys the book for 15, 16, whatever the price is, they're going to get a good deal, because they're going to get the whole paper in the appendix.
You can also find it online. Thank God for the internet these days, huh?
Yeah, it's not easy, but you can find it online. You can get it online, but
But I don't think people are buying your book for the paper itself. I think they're going to be buying it to see what your opinions are. And quite frankly, although controversial, I can understand where you're coming from.
Thank you. And I just want an opportunity to set the record right. I think Carl Sagan was misunderstood. I know he was misunderstood. And that when people think of Carl Sagan, they think of a person who was sold out on radio telescopes. That is not true. He was against it. They think of a person who fought his whole life against ancient alienism. He fought against the methodology. He believed in ancient alienism. So these are fundamental characteristics of a great man, and they're not known, and so my book brings this out, and hopefully, I'm standing by it. I offer a lot of evidence. It's an information-rich book, and again, I'm prepared to engage anybody who wants to engage me.
Well, I hope I prepared you in a little bit way, because, like we said before, it's probably going to get a little bit harder from here on out.
I look forward to it. I look forward to it, and I didn't put all my research into this book. When I originally contacted my agent, she said, "Don, you've got a lot of great research here, but it's too much for one book. So just, try to distill it down to one thing." And so I made it about Carl Sagan, and hopefully my next book, which I hope will be out in a year or so, will continue to add on to my arguments.
Will it be a companion piece with a focus on Carl Sagan, or more of just an expansion upon this idea?
It'll go deeper into Carl Sagan's thesis that on the Sumerian line of evidence, and there are clues and different leads that Carl Sagan left that I pick up on and I develop, and I'm very excited about that, and I think the public will be as well. And so this is kind of a foundational book, and it kind of creates a platform for more research. And hopefully there will be other people out there, scientists, lay scientists. After reading the book, they will do their own research and write their own books and articles reaffirming the claims that I make in my book.
Can't wait to continue this conversation here. Just give out your social media one last time before I let you go for the evening.
Sure. It's you can go online, thesaganconspiracy.com, and that'll put you onto the website, and from the website you can go to my Facebook and to my Twitter.
It was an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate trying to set the record straight on Carl Sagan.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity.
That was Donald Zygutis. We'll be right back with the Mind's Eye Show wrap-up. Unfortunately, it is the Mind's Eye Show wrap-up. More information on Donald and tonight's show up on our website, themindseyemedia.com. You'll also find links to our YouTube page up there. Every single one of our shows are free. We're not going to charge you. We want to spread the word about great information like tonight's show and also our next show, which is a double feature, a special 2-hour episode as we open the case files on occult life in Victorian Europe. We're joined by 2 fantastic guests. We got John Matthews talking about his book, The Mystery of Spring-Heeled Jack, which explores one of the biggest urban legends in the last 2 centuries. We're going to give it a stab and try and solve the case, and even talk about his connections to Jack the Ripper and Slender Man. And then in our double shot, we also have Tobias Churton. We're going to dive into his book, Occult Paris, and we're going to answer the question, how did the city